Good evening. Welcome to MUFON Los Angeles. My name is Steve Murillo. I am the State Section Director for MUFON LA. We have a wonderful presentation in store for you tonight. Giorgio Tsoukalos, he's going to be talking to us about new discoveries in the ancient astronaut field. He was born in Lucerne, Switzerland, and he is fluent in 5 languages. For over 2 decades, he has dedicated his life to the scientific study of the ancient astronaut theory, including detailed analysis of ancient scriptures, ancient drawings, and mysterious archaeological monuments and artifacts. He has written numerous articles about the topic for publications all around the world and uncovered strong supporting evidence for the ancient astronaut hypothesis. In his quest to uncover the truth, Giorgio has conducted several adventurous expeditions to the remote corners of the world in search of strange archaeological artifacts, including many not currently accessible to the general public. He's been a frequent media guest and lecturer all around the world about ancient astronauts. Giorgio is considered the worldwide expert on ancient astronaut theory. He is the chairman and director of the Research of the Archaeology, Astronautics, and SETI Research Association, and the publisher of their official quarterly, Legendary Times, which I think you all have on your chairs. Using scientific research methods, AASRA is determined to prove whether or not extraterrestrials have visited Earth in the remote past. Co-founded by Giorgio in 1998, the AASRA received recognition as the International Research Organization of Erich von Däniken. With that, I'd like to bring up, and please give a warm hand to Giorgio Tsoukalos.
Thank you. Thank you. Very nice. Cool. Eventually, mankind will venture into deep space. And that can be 100 years from now, that can be 200 years from now. And the reason why I'm saying that is because mankind is a species of explorers. A long time ago, when our forefathers were standing on the shores of Portugal and Spain, at a time when the earth is flat concept was still in vogue, people were still thinking, well, is the earth really flat? And if so, let's go check it out. Let's see what's out there. And how many of you, well, it's a rhetorical question with this group here, how many of you have stood outside at night, looked above, and asked, what's out there? And sure, it's because we have this fondness for extraterrestrial life, but also because we wonder what's out there, because intrinsically we are explorers. We're the only animal species on this planet with that particular trait, and that trait is curiosity. Sure, the cat is curious. However, mankind, or a human being, is even more curious in the fact that we can actually do something about it. We go out there and explore. Therefore, just like back then, when our forefathers tried to see what's across the big Atlantic Ocean, we will eventually explore deep space. And I hope it will be for the sake of exploration and not because we must move out there because of the sake of survival. So the idea remains, or the question that has to be asked is that 200-300 years from now, when we reach a different planet, and before I even talk about reaching a different planet, critics right away will say, oh, baloney. The distances between the stars are way too big, too distant. You could never reach another planetary or solar system. And you know what? They're absolutely right, those critics. However, whoever said that you have to come back and tell about it? What if not the first pilot that goes there comes back to tell you about his experiences, but the pilot's children's children? NASA has blueprints, current blueprints, where we could build what is called a generational starship. And a generation starship is a self-sufficient starship where an entire crew conceivably as big, with as many people as are currently in this room, 50, 60, 100 people. And the first generation will actually die on the ship. But while they are on the ship, they will procreate. And so you have the third or fourth generation arriving at that distant star system, which is, of course, predetermined. We're not just going to, shoot out there blindly. So like this, Michael Savage, in his book, The Millennial Project, mathematically proved that you could colonize the galaxy in 64 million years. Now, 64 million years is a long, long time. However, looking at 64 million years in the age of the universe, it's nothing but a blip. So even though it sounds long, it certainly isn't. So let me return then to the thought, what happens if we arrive at a planet that hosts intelligent life, but that intelligent life is, technologically speaking, still primitive? Will we just stand back and watch them and observe them from afar, like in Star Trek's Prime Directive, which says that you cannot interfere or influence a primitive society, that you have to leave them alone? I postulate that the human ego will not allow for that. Our egos are way too inflated for us to just stand back and watch. So what we will do is, we'll approach these beings and push them in the right direction. Give them a little gentle push, technologically speaking. We'll teach them in agriculture. We'll teach them in mathematics, astronomy, the sciences. And of course, when we arrive on that planet and we descend from the sky in our spaceship or in our shuttlecraft, if you are a primitive people, you achieve instant godlike status because it's pure magic that happens in front of their very eyes. So my postulation is, and that's the basic tenet of the ancient astronaut theory, is that if we eventually will do this 200-300 years down the road, why couldn't this have happened here on Earth 5, 7, 8, 10,000 years ago? And I'm going to take you around a thrill ride tonight around the globe to show you that there is evidence for exactly that. Here we are in India. And India is the most fascinating place for the ancient astronaut theory because all the ancient texts of the holy books of ancient India talk about these incredible occurrences, events that happened a long, long time ago, where if you read those texts with a modern perspective or from a modern perspective, it is pure science fiction. It's as if it's Star Wars. So what I would like to do is I would like to quote a few text passages from the Mahabharata, the Drona Parva, the Rig Veda, and so on and so forth. And I just wanted to, has anybody ever been to India? Okay. If you are at a hotel, chain hotel here in America and most of the Western world, in your nightstand, you will find a Holy Bible. You go to India, and it's not the Holy Bible, but it's the Rig Veda. It's their holy book. So there's all these different, occurrences that are happening where you go to a different culture, different countries, different continents, and it's totally different from here. And if you speak to a person in India and ask them about the ancient gods that flew around in ancient India, they will just say, yeah, so. It's totally normal to them. It is not a crazy idea because they are convinced that Indra and Shiva and all those ancient gods were here as physical beings and flew around in flying vehicles that they called vimanas. This here, actually, this temple tower, is what's called a rata, And a rata is actually translated into English, it means sky city, house of the gods, or sky ship. And I want to interject quickly before I delve into this. When I say the word gods, then I don't mean anything spiritual or being from a higher plane or something that you cannot touch, but rather a flesh and blood space traveler who were misunderstood as being gods because what happened back then to human beings was pure magic, and therefore they couldn't describe it, so they were like, my gosh, they're so incredible, they must be gods, even though they were flesh and blood beings just like us. At any rate, and today, by the way, the word viman in the Hindi language still means airplane. So there you have a word that has survived over the ages, and it essentially still means the same thing. And let me quote a few of these text passages here of the Mahabharata. And this is, for example, out of Book 1, Chapter 4. Heavenly blossoms soft descending with a perfume filled the air. Bright celestial cars in concourse sailed upon the cloudless sky. And it continues here. For example, and this here is from the Buddha's Vamin Brihat Kata Shloka Samgraha. And I'm not making this up, that's how long this name is. You have, in the morning in the cloudless sky, the ascetics heard a rolling which filled the atmosphere. What is it? They asked the aerial being. It is the noise of the drums of the aerial voyagers as they are enclosed in the bosom of the chariots. One hears them like a rolling of thunder with the storm of drums rumbling by the paths of heaven. Now let me reiterate that right here it says that these celestial beings were sitting inside the bosom of the celestial vehicle. That's a very detailed description. And the descriptions I'm reading here, they date back thousands of years. Of course, it's an English translation, but any of you can go to a reputable library and read university-approved translations to see that none of this stuff is invented or of course it's interpreted in the ancient astronaut field or in the ancient astronaut point of view. However, the ancient astronaut point of view essentially just looks at all these ancient descriptions with the help of, looking at it from a modern perspective, asking yourselves, well, what is it exactly these people tried to describe back then? Because one thing we also have to remember is that back then, our forefathers didn't have the exact vocabulary to say that this was a spaceship or that this was a machine or that, they had to describe it with the vocabulary that they had at their disposal. So descriptive words became very important for them to describe what they saw. And then, for example, this text continues, in golden splendor filling all the spaces of the firmament, a troop of chariots, stupefied by the enormous splendor of varied jewels, appeared to the ascetics in the distance arriving from the sky. The chariots descended. That of Chakravartin halted at the door of the Hermitage, the others in the gorges on the backs and tops of the mountains. The chariot of the Supreme King of the Vidayaras had the form of a lotus flower ornamented with 26 petals which were of rubies. And for example, one of the most famous texts that is ancient is the Vimanika Shastra, which is not only ancient, but also it has pages upon pages of detailed descriptions what these vimanas, these flying vehicles with which the gods flew around in, what they were constructed of, how fast they were flying. Some of these things had the capability to fly at lightning speed, which is, very amazing. It's all detailed descriptions. And in our Western world, we tend to essentially just, put these descriptions in the world of mythology and legend. And the main point of, one of the main points, of course, of the ancient astronaut theory is to look at all these legends and determine, where is that kernel of truth? Because to every legend, there is a certain core of inspiration, that initial spark. And this is exactly what we're trying to find out. And also notice how the author specifically, or the different authors specifically talk about the firmament and not heaven. Because heaven has a multiple meaning. It could be, heaven or hell. But if you talk about the firmament, that's by definition, the sky, what you see, above the horizon. That's the firmament. And so they're not always talking about, that they came from heaven, because that can always be misinterpreted as something supernatural or something, religious. And so in this many cases, they talk about the firmament in many of the descriptions of ancient India. Now, this is one of those temple towers. And here we have a picture of a space shuttle successor. Unfortunately, this thing failed, but it was, this thing is called the Delta Clipper, which was a prototype, and essentially this Delta Clipper was able to launch on its tail, fly into the sky like this, remember, this thing was a ship of the gods, or a sky city. There's hundreds of these representations in ancient India. And whenever you ask somebody, what is this? Well, these are the towers with which the gods flew up into the sky. So there is a connection there. And my question is history repeating itself? Because we like to think of ourselves as the pinnacle of creation. We are the best. We are, nothing surpasses us. Yet, here we have ancient descriptions of these flying vehicles, and here we are, essentially looking at similar technology or similar occurrences. And one example to show you about these whole ancient occurrences of flight was when legendary Times member Preben Hansen, he's a hobby pilot, a few years ago, boarded his little private plane in Denmark. And this mound is called the Trelleborg. And it's not a Danish beer, it's a holy mound. And, it's allegedly was inhabited by the Vikings. And absolutely, the Vikings did live there because bones were found and little Viking brooches. But we have to remind ourselves that the Vikings, they were a seafaring people. And the Trelleborg here is 2 miles inland. So, they would have had to drag their boats inland and all of this. So very, very complicated to do this. Also, the Vikings are not known to have been a geometrically inclined people. But the Trelleborg is extremely geometric in fashion. And essentially, what he did is, if you look here, this is, of course, a representation. This is the Trelleborg right here. And there's 13 little elliptical-shaped boats. And they all, if you see, they all point in one direction. So he entered the autopilot to go into this direction. And after 67 kilometers, which is around 50 miles, he came across the other sacred mound of Eskeholm, and he was surprised But no big deal because, 2 points can be connected by one line without a problem. But then he continued his flight on the same line. And after 100 kilometers, he came across the mound of Firkat, also another sacred mound site. And then he almost fainted while he was flying. And at a total of 218 kilometers, which is roughly 180 miles, he came across the sacred site of Agersborg. And now let me show you this. The dark masses here, that's water. That's the ocean. The white is land. 180 miles. Mountains, hills, valleys, water. In between, perfect straight line. Some people might say, okay, whatever, big deal. Okay. The good man went home into his living room, took out a big map, and connected the dots and said, what will happen if I'm extending the line further south? Delphi, the oracle in Greece. Now, our friend Apollo, who flew around in a chariot, always left the Greeks for some months during the year when he was there, teaching them in various aspects. He was, of course, a healer, but also a teacher. And he always said, I'm leaving because I have to go I have to go and visit a faraway people, the Hyperboreans, which live on the other side from where the north wind comes. And we all know the Hyperboreans, that's where Norse mythology is located. And I don't have to slide, but you can do this tonight. Connect those lines through Delphi, further down. You will end up at the Giza Plateau in Egypt. Coincidence? I don't think so. Here we are in Egypt, actually, at a site called Abu Zir. And Abu Zir is highly interesting because there you have the phenomenon of the core drill holes. And this here is such a core drill hole. And a core drill hole essentially is, if you imagine a piece of styrofoam and you have a pipe, and the pipe turns very, very fast at high revolutions, and you insert the pipe into that styrofoam, and then you take the pipe back out, the styrofoam remains inside the pipe. So you've just made a core sample. So that's a core drill. And you can only do this with a core drill. And the mysterious thing about the core drill holes is, and you can see here, that you can see actually the tip of this pipe that was drilling inside the rock. Let me remind you, not remind you, but tell you that this stone here is diorite, which is a little bit less dense than diamonds. So it's a very, very hard and dense stone. Very hard. So the only way this could have been done is if the tip of that core drill had diamonds on it. And in order to put those diamonds on the tip of that pipe, you need a very high-tech type of glue so that it doesn't fall off. And then you need very, very high revolutions and pressure to be able to, make such precise holes like this. Now, let me remind you that Sir Flinders Petrie reported about this in the late 1800s. The core drill machine was not invented until the early 1900s. So anybody that says, oh, well, somebody just, had a field there and was doing some core drilling there, and, after the fact, no, because in an old book from the late 1800s, Sir Flinders Petrie, in the original, he has, these nice etchings, drawings that they made back then of these core drill holes, thus proving that this is ancient. Oh. So the critics always say, okay, fine, coincidence, but here we are in Malta, which is a little beautiful island in the Mediterranean. What do we have here? Another core drill hole. So people are saying, okay, Malta is a stone's throw away from Egypt, which it is, by a flying vehicle, of course. But this here is on the other side of the world, in Peru, in Cusco, at the monastery of the Coricancha. And this piece here is called El Teodolito, which allegedly that's how the ancients, they observed the sky with this piece of rock. Don't ask me how they did it. It doesn't look like an observatory to me. It's too small for that. But if you look closer, the hole that we have here is a bit more sophisticated, because do you see this line, this groove here? This is not the grain of the rock. So, if this was done mechanically, the only way that a groove like this is left behind, if you have a piston, a pipe that is attached to a piston and it punches right through. And the force that's needed to punch through rock in a perfect fashion like this requires speed and incredible amount of force. So how they did it, with chicken bones and obsidian. I mean, that's, what the archaeologists say. Here we are in my most favorite place on the entire world, and that's Puma Punku, which is right next to the famous site of Tiwanaku, which is next to Lake Titicaca in the Andean highlands. And all the tourists go to Tiwanaku. They go to the Gate of the Sun. And the Gate of the Sun is gorgeous. It's beautiful. It's about 3 yards high, about a half a yard deep, thick. But it's not impressive. I mean, sure it is. But what nobody wants to, or nobody realizes where the real mystery lies, is a stone's throw away from Tiwanaku, which is Puma Punku. And you can see, this is my little bag here, how gigantic these pieces of rock are, and how perfectly cut they are. Has anybody been to Puma Punku in here? Okay. Go this summer. It'll be cool there, not too hot, so it'll be gorgeous. But you have all these things are, these stones are also diorite and andesite, very, very hard, very, very dense stone. And the incredible thing is, when you touch these pieces, it looks rough, but it feels as if you're touching glass. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with the term vitrification. The only way you can achieve vitrification is with high, high heat. And when you touch that, the corners are sharp. You could actually cut yourself. So none of this stuff was, polished or, done scratched away with a chicken bone. And what does conventional archaeology say about this? Conventional archaeology says that this place was built by the Aymara Indians. And you can still meet some of the Aymara Indians when you go there. You still have, the heirs of the original people the original natives that were there, and they still have all their oral traditions. They're very proud people, very adamant about, transferring their oral traditions in the right and the correct way without, embellishing stuff or adding things or taking things away or forgetting things. No, you have, literally original stories from way back when. And even though the archaeologists in textbooks, by the way, out of about 50 textbooks, only 4 even mention Puma Punku, and then it's only a couple of paragraphs. Nobody goes into this in detail. And then they say, the Aymaras built this, and when you personally ask the Aymaras, did you build this? They say, no. Well, who built it? Los dioses, the gods, before the beginning of time. And we have only, and that's the Aymaras talking now, we have only seen this place in ruins. We've never seen this place as a whole when it was still intact. So when the Aymaras say that, this has something to do with the gods, and again, let me be very clear about this. When I talk about gods, it has nothing to do with religion, has nothing to do with a cult or a sect or any type of, stuff. Space travelers, like we will be 200-300 years down the road. So when they say that the gods built this, then we should listen to them. But look at the wild cuttings and masonry things that we have here. Where again, if you were to touch it like so, you would cut your finger. Here we can go closer. And if this weren't enough, what is this? Ritual object? I don't think so. Something very, very technical. And I read in one archaeology book that this was done with a chicken bone. It's a diorite column. Well, a rectangular column. The groove is perfect. You go down with your thumb, you cut your thumb. It's like glass. It is extreme. I mean, it's so smooth. In all of my travels, I have not come across anything like Puma Punku. There are similarities, but this is absolutely wild. Look at this entire field of destruction. All of these things were at one point together. And over here, of course, you have these pieces that are lined up, and archaeologists move these pieces around. Oh, have I told you that most of these pieces range from starting at 1 ton to 160 tons? Now, this raises the question of transportation. And in one book, it said, oh, no problem, wooden rollers. What they don't tell you is that we're at 12,500 feet, which is above the tree line. I'd like to know which lumber company supplied all the wooden rollers for this gigantic, construction project. There will be a picture later on that shows the plateau. No trees, just shrubs and grass. And there never were any trees even a long time ago, in case somebody thinks, oh, maybe it was deforestation in order to have all the wood to transport these things. Wood would crumble and crush under the massive weight of these slabs. Here we have these pieces lined up, and we actually measured these pieces, put them into a computer model, and because they're all, the 7 pieces that you see here, they're all identical, as if they were prefabricated blocks. They remind us sort of Legos, and that's what we thought of when we saw them. And when we did the computer model, we tried to put these pieces together, and they did in fact interlock like Legos. And they were very, very resistant to, them being toppled over or from an earthquake or something like of the nature. This is the front. These are the backs. And of course, this is all weathered because this is at least 8,000 years old. I will get to that in another part. Absolutely. Good question. Here we have a picture of the plain. No trees. Some of these blocks have these clamp-like impressions. And some archaeology books say, well, they, in order to keep together these gigantic stone slabs, they would pour liquid metal into this clamp-like impression. The metal would harden and thus, keep these stone slabs together. We're at 12,500 feet, where it is extremely hot during the day and extremely cold at night. Metal would break because these things move. So the question is, what was poured in there? What was this? And the crazy thing is that people might say again, okay, fine, that's just Puma Punku. This picture was taken on the Giza Plateau. Does that look familiar? It's on the other side of the planet. It's as if all these ancient stonemasons went to the same school. Because I'm sure the internet did not exist back then. That I'm sure of. This here, similar object or similar idea, is a picture taken in Greece. Here we are again back in Peru, and this is another site called Ollantaytambo, which is another quote-unquote tourist trap, but I want you to go there. But when you go, the tourist bus will drop you off at the front entrance. I want you to be rebels and say, no, I want to go towards the back. I want the back entrance. And that's what it looks like. And this is where all the sensational pieces are strewn about. Here you have walls, rock faces that are cut off as if with gigantic butter knives. Again, you touch that, it's as smooth as a baby's bottom. It's like glass. It is incredible. Now, the interesting thing is, again, what I'm trying to illustrate here is that the global phenomenon of these similarities. This is Greece, Santorini Island. Beautiful, beautiful island. You must go. That was my plug to go on a vacation in Greece. Here we have a cut wall face. Very precise, also in Greece, very smooth. It looks, this is porous stone. So therefore you have all these holes in there. However, where the cut is smooth. Here we are back at the back entrance of Ollantaytambo. And I want you to look at these features here, how it seems like entire slabs have just been cut out of the mountain, the face of the mountain, face of the rock. And the top one here is sort of doable or possible to cut out. Because you cut from the sides, you cut from the bottom, and you slide a blade or a saw from the back or whatever, however they did it. How did they remove the slab from the back of the rock face here? There is no access point from the back of the slab, because that slab lies right next to it. Now, at this point, some previous lectures, people would ask, well, why is it discolored? Reason is, it's ancient, and it was out in the elements. But we measured the thing, and it fits in there without deviation. It's as if you would have taken an X-Acto knife or a carpet knife and just sliced it. So it wasn't like that they used like a big gigantic blade or something, but something very fine, very sharp. So the question remains, well, how did they do this? And it is my conviction that they had some sort of machines with which they were able to cut this. And I will actually get to that, but before we go there, look at how this piece, which is, by the way, this is a piece from in the bedrock. This is intrinsic to the rock. This piece here was laid on top as if formed by putty. You have all these different slabs laying about. So obviously this was a quarry, no question. However, you climb higher and higher because I asked them, is there anything that's really interesting to see? And they said, yes, up there. So, I hope that none of you, if you go there, you suffer a vertigo, because it's not very, good to go up there, because the ledge is about, your toes will be above the abyss. And so you can't be drunk when you do this. You have to be, get a good night's of sleep beforehand. And so I want you to go higher and higher on this ledge, on a little path, and you will come across about 50 yards up on the face of the rock. You will come across this, where you have this round piece of rock that was just cut out of the face of the mountain. And those are the cut marks at the bottom of that area. About a yard deep and about 3 yards wide. Perfection. You can see how these cuts go into the mountain. Here we are in Sacsayhuaman, also in Peru. You have those world-famous Inca walls, which are so perfect, you cannot even put a blade in between the stones. And mind you, there is no concrete in between these stones. There is no binding agent, no glue, nothing. It's just, it fits perfectly. And this is actually the first earthquake-proof construction known to mankind, because in Cusco, we are, like here in California, in earthquake country, and even the Spanish chroniclers reported about earthquakes and things like this. And those walls, after these many thousands of years, still remain. And even there, when you ask the heirs of the Incas, who built this? They all say, categorically, this is pre-Inca stuff. Pre-Inca. So what I have a problem with is that when Western archaeologists all of a sudden say, no, they're wrong, the Incas built this. When they say, no, this was here before the Incas. And just because it doesn't fit into conventional acceptance doesn't mean that all these people, all these, heirs of the Incas who say that this is pre-Inca stuff are lying. Because that's their history. They know what they're talking about. Here we are also again, Peru with the Inca walls. And just to reiterate the global phenomenon of these things, go back, Peru, Greece. Greece, 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 Egypt, Egypt, and we're back in Cusco. In Cusco itself, you have these perfect walls that are more rectangular in shape. Again, I would give any one of you a $20 bill, and if you can find one spot where you can put in that $20 bill in between the seams of these things, you can keep the $20 bill. It's not going to happen. This here is Greece, so you see the similarity. Same identical stonemasonry type. Greece, beautiful. Okay, even though we've seen these, these crazy similarities, I haven't come across this anywhere else but in Peru, in Cusco, and archaeologists say that this is a sacrificial altar. Okay, great, fantastic. But what was the sacrifice about? For what? What was this? I mean, it looks like some sort of a safe deposit box, something really technical, very technical. So, I mean, you can see there is, as if there was bars inside that you could have placed because the holes, they're all corresponding with one another from one side to the other. And here we are at the Coricancha, the monastery, also again in Cusco. And you can see how, up here the wall is a bit more perfect than down here. In fact, I have a close-up from the lower wall. And here, this doesn't look as perfect as above here. So, looks like that this has been, the more perfect wall has been built on top of the older wall. So the older wall is less perfect. Well, that wall was built in 1979, and what you've seen here is an optical illusion. There is a path that goes through here, but from the angle that I took this picture, I just wanted to illustrate that this was built in 1979. We can't do what the ancients did with our technology. Here we are back in Greece. Does that look like a pyramid to you? When people talk about a pyramid, they immediately think about Egypt, or they think about Central America with the Mayan pyramids. But this is a Greek pyramid. And there's two theories behind this. Two hypotheses when this thing was built, and one is that it might have been built during the reign of Alexander the Great, approximately 356 through 323 BC, after the ancient Greeks had seen the pyramids in Egypt as a, imitation. However, there is this second theory that's circulating, and The gentleman here asked, how can you date this, especially with stone? And here is where dating methods become very controversial, because the dating method virtually everybody is familiar with in archaeology is the C14 dating, where you essentially measure the half-life of carbon that's in the tested material. The fallacy or the problem with C14 dating is that you can only date organic materials such as bones or textiles or coal or shards of pottery. So the fallacy that is committed is that, let's say you come to a site that's utterly foreign to you, and you find a piece of bone or a piece of textile, and you measure that, and hypothetically speaking, that piece dates to 500 BC. Unfortunately, what conventional archaeology does is, we found that piece of bone or that piece of wood in this fire pit, and it's dated to 500 BC, which means the site also dates to 500 BC. And that's wrong, because who says that that site was not inhabited multiple times? So the only way that you can really test the age of something or determine the age of something is if you actually are able to test the stone. Because the moment you work stone, there's a chemical process that takes place on the surface of the stone. And so I'm going to read this to you because this is rather complicated. There is a new way that they came up with in 1997, an extremely expensive way to test the age of stone, and that's why nobody virtually has heard of it or nobody does this, because it costs thousands of dollars, and a lot of universities or foundations just don't have the money to do this. But anyway, so here, let me read this to you real quick. In October of 1997, a Greek-British team of archaeologists performed the thermoluminescent analysis at the pyramid in Greece. This revolutionary technique, called thermoluminescent analysis, is the first dating method which can actually determine the age of stone. This method works like this: feldspar, calcite, and quartz, elements most frequently occurring in stone, emit or radiate light when the elements are heated up. The thermoluminescence originates from electrons which were excited through radioactive rays and then are trapped by polluted crystals. The number of trapped electrons rises over time. Thus, the more electrons have been trapped, the older the age of the rock. So, they were indeed able to accurately date this pyramid. This is actually in Argos, about 2 hours from Athens, very easy to find. According to these new results, the pyramid was built in 2700 BC, which, officially speaking, is before Cheops. I do not believe the Great Pyramid was built by Cheops. So, rest assured, 2 days after these results went public, the team was told to back up and go home. They pulled the excavation permits. I wonder why. Here we are in Guatemala, and Guatemala is this incredible treasure trove of ancient astronaut evidence. And this is the Lago de Atitlan, one of the most beautiful spots on the entire planet, where we actually extended, the 2 times that I've been there, we every time extend our expeditions for 3 days, 4 days, because the serenity, the beauty of that place, Lago de Atitlan, is stupendous, mind-blowing. So anybody that will go to Guatemala out of this crowd, go there. It's incredible, very special place. But this is about an hour or 2 away from one of the most recognizable Mayan sites, Tikal, with its spectacular towers, pyramid-shaped towers. And I want you to just quickly look down here and burn that image into your minds, because we're going to come back to this. If these are what's called steles, and in front you have these round altars. If I were to stand next to one of these steles, monoliths, would be about this tall. Massive things, one piece of rock. And they're all over Tikal. You have all these mysterious buildings. Anybody remember the first Star Wars movie, the original, episode 3 or 4, I guess? The original, 1977. This was the Rebel base. The X-Wing fighters going to fight the Death Star. George Lucas actually went down there with his crew, filmed in Tikal, and then later on, put the X-Wing fighters, shooting out of that. But that's the shot right here. So after we saw Tikal, which, as you've just seen, gigantic monuments, gigantic structures, always with these monumental stones that were used, big rocks. That you always have to remember, big rocks require planning, transportation, logistics. You got to feed everybody. We were also told, well, make sure that, you go to Uaxactún, which is 10 miles away from Tikal, and it's not a tourist trap, but this is the long road to Tikal, to Uaxactún. And of course, before you leave, you should always fill up your tank of gas. Ladies and gentlemen, 10 miles. It rained 4 days in a row before we took our trip. Took us 7 hours for 10 miles. It was one of the best days I've ever had. Spectacular adventure. 7 hours going, 7 hours coming back. Absolutely beautiful. This is a 2-way road, so there's oncoming traffic. Not often, but it happens. But you arrive at Uaxactún, and this blows Tikal out of the water. Even more massive stones. Bigger monuments, stone-wise. This stairwell here, try climbing it. You'll feel really small when you do this. That night when we came back to the Jungle Lodge, and that's the best place to stay actually in Tikal, if you go there, tell them Giorgio sends you. They'll either love you or they hate you. Depends. There's different stories out there. But the people at Jungle Lodge said, well, if you're interested in mysteries, you have to go to the Lago de Yaja lake, where you should visit the island of Topochte. And the great mystery there is, there you have remnants of the midget Maya. I said, midget Maya? Never even heard of such a thing. What is this? So they said, oh, no, that's where the dwarf Maya lived. And okay, so we, because when you travel and somebody tells you an insider thing, 2 things can happen. Either you go and there's absolutely nothing, and you're like, okay, well, that was a waste, or you do it. And this was well worth it, because what we've seen in Tikal and Uaxtun was exclusively all monumentally structured, gigantic, big. Same period. Replicas of what we've just seen. Now, I'm not saying that these are miniature replicas or of all the other sites, like, building by building, but it's an imitation. Stones the size of fists. Those steles with the round altar stones in front. Remember how gigantic they were before in Tikal? You could hoist that over your shoulder and walk around with it. What's going on here? Luckily, there was a university team there, so I had the privilege to talk to the archaeologists there. And boy, they don't know I'm doing this right now, which is great, but they told me, it's a mystery. We don't know what this is. And then I approach him and say, could it be that this was basically just an imitation where Tikal and Uaxtun, in my opinion, could have only been constructed with advanced high-tech technology. But this, anybody can do this. You don't need sophisticated technology to create, things like this. So let me interject here for a moment that whenever, I say that I head this organization, and then people immediately they ask me, so you're one of these crackpots that says, aliens built the pyramids. And I say no. Because in the classic ancient astronaut theory, nobody ever said that the pyramids were built by extraterrestrials. And I'm speaking of the classic ancient astronaut hypothesis, which I represent. What the classic ancient astronaut hypothesis says is that the pyramids or all the ancient structures were built by human beings with the assistance of the extraterrestrials, with their high-tech technology that they either lent us or gave us, or, when they had, this idea, let's build something, they had an obedient workforce. And they said, you put this stone here, you put that stone there, you can't lift it, okay, let me help you. But they did not dirty their hands and build the pyramids. They had us do it. And we were infatuated that, cool, man, we were able to help these guys. We'll be rewarded. So that was just an interjection on that idea, and I'm going to, come back to that thought later on. But I asked the excavators there, were there ever any artifacts discovered? And they said yes. But unfortunately, the originals had already been brought to Guatemala City, where they were being examined at the archaeology lab. But they had replicas made. And on every archaeological dig, when you find artifacts and if they're valuable, immediately they make replicas of them so that just in case they get destroyed or lost or stolen, at least we know what was there, or they're cataloged. And so there was a couple of figurines that they had, and we asked them, well, could we see these things? And the guy said, oh, absolutely. So he brought us into the shed, grabbed this box, this cardboard box, put it in front of it on a table, and the dust flew, and he, pulled out these 3 in plastic wrapped objects, and he unwrapped the first object, and and he came up with this, a nightly animal. And no big deal. Some sort of a creature, a jar. You could open this up and, put something in there, whatever. And then he opened the second object, or unwrapped the second object, and I almost fainted. I asked, what is this, please? And he said, well, this is a representation of the giant turtles in which the gods once flew around in our area. I asked him again, I said, what did you say? And without the batting of an eyelash, he said again, this is a representation of one of the giant turtles with which the gods once flew around in our area. He didn't know I was into ancient astronauts, that I was running this organization, that this is my research. You got a turtle head, very obviously. You get a humanoid face with what I like to see as goggles, as if, worn by modern fighter pilots. And look at the extremities. How aerodynamic this thing is. And do you see that one thing is also missing? What do turtles have? A pattern. Beautiful pattern. It's missing. It's completely flat. And now the critics will shout, oh, it's just symbolism, we have to look at this from this angle and that angle, and, it is a turtle because they were just trying to be artful and, And I answer, look, the ancients were not stupid, they were not dumb, they knew exactly what a turtle looked like. Same area, same period, same everything. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a turtle. They knew exactly what a pattern, let me go back and just, and the original, of course, this is made out of wood, it's a replica, but the original is made out of clay. But the mythology behind it, the legend, is absolutely incredible. So anyway, as we get closer to the last 20 minutes in the PowerPoint presentation that I'm about to give after these few slides, this here is a statue that they found in Egypt. And they call this, in Egyptology, the bearded man. And, okay, but if you look closely, this is one piece. And it looks almost like the protective suits a hazmat team wears. And down here, of course, this is not a tool belt, it's a penis sheath. The question is, where does this idea of a penis sheath come from anyway? What is the origin of that? What was the inspiration? But no, this cannot be a tool belt. God forbid. You can see here that this is a skull cap type of thing that comes down to here. You can see the belt. But obviously it's a bearded man. This is our Legendary Times mascot. This is actually at an exhibit here in America, in New York City, at the Museum of Natural History. And if this thing doesn't say it all, then I don't know what does. you have this being wearing boots, some sort of suit, with wings, with some sort of a pack, with tubes and pipes coming out of here, skull cap again, just very similar like our Apollo astronauts would wear before they would put on their helmet. And I was surprised when I read the little plaque that went with this figurine. By the way, this figurine is from Veracruz in Mexico, central Veracruz, made out of clay. The plaque actually read, "This figurine is most unusual." No kidding. The figure has not been identified with any particular deity, and it is not known what it represents. You know what? For once, they conceded. And they said, you know what? Hey, this is a mystery. Great. Let's leave it at that. And again, I'm not saying that this is an exact reproduction or representation of an extraterrestrial or whatever. What I'm saying is that the common thread tonight is what I like to call misunderstood technology. So I want to illustrate to you a few more examples of this misunderstood technology business where an artist tried to render something he saw or tried to render something he tried to depict from memory. Here we are in Tikal again in Guatemala. And here you can even see it better, the example that I gave before. This is a person, and here you have these steles. I mean, these are massive things. Here we have a stele that is in Tikal, and you can see these arms and elbows that are on an angle with weird ornamentations. The creature, the being, is wearing gloves or mittens. And here you have this tube, this pipe that comes down into a canister. Here is it even a little bit clearer. And here is the entire piece of rock that's been worked. You have the elbows. You have the gloves. You have the green stuff. Of course, it's been colored in. This is not original. But at the bottom here, where you have he wears really Star Wars-like boots. Now, again, misunderstood technology. What did the human artist try to depict here? What did he try to tell us? What the heck was going on? The tube going into this canister. Archaeology, and I'm not lying on this one, says that this here is the person's spine. Any chiropractor in this room? First off, your spine is inside your body. You'd be dead like this, and even if it were somehow possible, that thing would have to walk like this. I actually have a clip on this. Here we are in India. Everybody know the Indian god Ganesh, usually depicted with an elephant's head, and he's got the trunk, okay? That is the modern Ganesh. This is an ancient bronze statue of Ganesh And do you see a bit of a difference here? Of it not being an actual trunk, but it's a tube, some sort of tubing that goes into a little canister that he carries around in his hands. And there's also, not much of an elephant head there, but more or less something of a creature. Here we are in Guatemala, where you have this, they call this in archaeology the weasel head. I just don't see it. I'm trying. But here you have almost like a window, and behind it you have an eye with a bridge of a nose. And here you have something like a breath coming out. Here you have tubing, pipes that go again back to a canister. Here we are in Egypt. And no lecture about this could be complete without going at least to Egypt for a few minutes. Here we have a depiction of the so-called jade pillar. And the jade pillar represents power and force and might in ancient Egypt. And it was always represented with the pharaohs and with certain, strange, mysterious objects. And whenever we talk about power, the first thing that comes to mind is, how you can subjugate slaves or how you can, smite your enemy and things like this. But power is also, if you put your finger inside an electric outlet, it'll knock you out because of electric power. And actually, the issue of Legendary Times that you've all received tonight is an Egypt special. And it talks all about ancient Egypt and the evidence that ancient Egypt was in possession of electricity. And I'm going to show you a couple of ideas why we think that happened. Again, you have two of these jade pillars right next to each other. You have jade pillars that are being, given from one ruler to the other as a gift of power. Well, what if that power was not a gift of, force in a higher sense, but of actual brute force where, it had to do with electricity. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this frieze, which is in the Dendera crypt at the Hathor temple, underground. You'll have to climb down into the crypt, and it's very narrow, so if anybody of you is claustrophobic, don't do it. But right here, we have depictions of light bulbs. The hieroglyphs here, down here, and back there speak of power and force of illumination. Werner Garn, an Austrian engineer, he took this and he created a light bulb out of this with Egyptian principles using the Baghdad battery, which is ancient. Looks like this from a cross-section. And if you were to take a modern Duracell battery and cut it in half, you'd have the same cross-section, conceptually speaking, like here. Now, let me interject briefly. When Baghdad was invaded, there were hundreds of troops to protect the oil fields. Not one guardian for the National Museum in Baghdad. The battery is gone. Nobody knows where it is, what happened to it, if it's ever, if it's now available somewhere in the black market. But luckily, we've made replicas. There are replicas around. But this 6,000-year-old battery is built on the same principle like a modern battery, where You have the asphalt insulator down here. You have a copper disc, the copper cylinder, the iron rod that goes right in the middle, the asphalt stopper. You add the electrolyte vinegar, and you have immediately an electric current. And this is old stuff. Here we come to Nazca. And the biggest critique Legendary Times always receives is, oh, so, you're with Eric von Daniken, the guy that said, that this is where the aliens landed and built their airstrips. And anyone that has ever read that book actively and concentrated and focused will have to admit, no one in the classic ancient astronaut hypothesis has ever said that this is an alien airport. All we've said is, looking at this from the air, it looks like an airport. And ladies and gentlemen, it does. It really does. But to say that aliens landed here, and before they were able to land, they first had to build an airstrip, is dumb. So here is what we think happened. When we, 200 years down the road, will go to a distant planet, we will have sophisticated enough radar systems where we can scan a planet. And every planet has these so-called hot spots of minerals or, precious metals, gold, whatever. And Nazca, for our Earth, is such a hot spot. It is a beacon that screams, come here, check this area out. So it is quite obvious why anybody would have gone there. So the extraterrestrial away team landed there with their vehicle, shuttle, whatever, without any landing strips there. And just like we went on the moon and roved about with our lunar vehicle, the lunar vehicle on the moon left behind paths, traces, lines. We performed samples. We were digging around. The same thing happened here. While they were watched by the natives of the Nazca Plain. And as fast as they came, they quickly disappeared again. And the natives were absolutely stunned. What just happened here? Look at these lines. These must have been gods that were here. You know what? We want them to come back. So they started to build these lines. How it was done exactly, no one knows, truly, because even if this was done by natives, I want you to look at this. This line here goes over this line, or runway, which, again, let me reiterate, this is not a runway. And on other pictures, you have this line going underneath the line, the big runway. And some of these lines, in case anybody's wondering, they can extend in a perfect straight line for over 23 miles. Over valleys, mountains, hills, everything. Perfect. I want you to look at this picture for a moment here. A mountain converges at the top. There is a summit. There's a grate. Where is it? It just goes like this and pff, as if it was bulldozed, as if the top summit was cut off. And there's a better pictures where you can see that. See the mountain is coming up here. But all of this is gone. I mean, it's flat. And watch the zigzag line. The zigzag line goes underneath the runway. Looks like a runway. Which means the zigzag line is older than what was placed on top of it later on. And there's the idea that they scratched the surface away with their feet and stuff like this. But they're really, it is a true mystery. Here's another picture of this mountain. And nowhere in the area, by the way, will you find the rubble in case this top really was bulldozed or whatever. Nothing in the area around it. So now we're going to go and, okay. Before, I also have a clip of flying over the plain of Nazca. When you go to Nazca, has anybody ever been to Nazca? Fantastic. Oh, many people. All right, great. Next time you go, when you come to Nazca, you can rent a plane, very easy to do, but when you're flown around, all you're shown, and this is always on the Discovery Channel and anything you read about Nazca, what they show you is always the spider, the fish, the bird, the monkey, and, exactly, yes. But nobody talks about the lines that extend for miles, and nobody talks about this. And this is more on the outskirts of Nazca, but it's still in the plateau there. And from this point to this point, it's about 100 yards. But I'm not satisfied. This is not big enough for me. Still not enough. That's the entire thing. And I'm calling it just that, a thing. Reminds me of a crop circle, but this thing is ancient. You have a circle down here, you have a circle here, circle there, square, triangle. Triangular-shaped UFOs, anyone, over Arizona? Similar form. By the way, let me go back one. Notice how perfect this line here is. This here is a crevasse. It's a little, valley type thing, but doesn't matter. Okay, so here we are. I'll take you across the plain of Nazca. Yes? You mean the crop circle looking thing? I can give you the exact dimensions. I have it in my satchel over there. Yep. This is the bird, the colibri. Oh yes, and one other interesting thing about this is, notice, and that's why we did these outlines. Ever taken a piece of paper and tried to draw a thing in one line? All of these things are drawn like that, without taking off the pen. So this is the stuff that you will be shown flying around unless you ask to see the other stuff I showed you. You have the lines that go over it, under it. So again, you have more ancient lines and you have newer lines. They're all old, of course. That's the mountain that's the mountaintop is missing. When a mountaintop converges at the top. Line going underneath, going across the mountain. Look at this. Mountaintop gone. It's flat. With a zigzag line going underneath. You can't, because it's just gravel. See, anybody who says to you they know the answer to this is lying. Oh, it's sea level. At the Nazca, it's desert, so it's it's very hot, very hot. And then, of course, the most famous thing that's about to come up, which is an ancient depiction, is extremely, extremely intriguing. So looking like from the air, it looks like an airport. But it wasn't. I mean, it's a gigantic picture book. And ladies and gentlemen, what is this? This little guy here is called El Astronauta. One hand pointing to the sky, one hand pointing to Earth. I don't think any further interpretation is necessary. So I would like to close this with our piece de la résistance. Oh, just a couple of slides still about the gold flyers out of Colombia. You can find the originals, at the Gold Museum in Bogota, and also at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., where they have originals such as this one, our other mascot. Conventional archaeology says that these are nothing but fish and insects. I've never seen an insect with a propeller. Call me crazy. I've never seen an insect with a propeller. And, fins on a fish like this? My colleague, Dr. Algund Inboom in Switzerland and Germany, a couple of years ago with his colleague, an Air Force pilot, German Air Force, their hobby is model planes. And they actually recreated this Legendary Times gold flyer as a model, about this long, and inside of it, around in here, they put a propeller so that it was essentially mimicking a jet engine, because it was pulling in the air from outside and, propelled the air from the back. And they did not deviate from this shape 1 inch. They essentially just, these are little pendants, they were pendants that the people wore, around their neck as, jewelry. But they essentially took one of these things and they blew it up according to the perfect ratio of the small item. So they didn't deviate, no bigger wings, smaller wings, whatever. They started the propeller, threw that thing in the air, and that thing was able to fly. So to say that, that this is mere coincidence, this is actually the fleet that you can see at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. But anyways, here I would like to conclude with the piece de la résistance of the ancient astronaut theory, and that is, here we have some, statues, again, by artists that were depicting something they saw. These are Dogu statues from Japan, Central America. This is in a monastery in Yugoslavia, where, this man is sitting inside a star. That's, and if you were to see the entire fresco or the entire painting, it's literally in midair. Here we have this Maya fresco with frieze with these guys carrying their toolboxes, or who knows, maybe it might have been their lunchbox. But, it looks like a modern day, flashlight or something like this, the ones you can buy at Home Depot. Here we are in Copan, Honduras. This guy, again, with the same similar, hands manipulating some controls on a pack on his chest. Here we are in Tula, Mexico. Here we have this guy with a helmet sitting. This is the La Venta Park in Mexico. And you have this guy, again, with some sort of a thing, canister, whatever, sitting inside a snake. And what's one of the biggest mythologies in Central and South American lore? Quetzalcoatl Kukulkan, the flying serpent, who was known to have brought the teachers from the sky. How much more obvious can it get? Here is the serpent, the snake, with this guy sitting inside of it. Look at it from a modern perspective. Because, again, misunderstood technology. They couldn't explain it. So, wow. This, what are we going to do? Well, I guess this is how it works. A gigantic snake that can fly. Here we have Beb Cororoti of the Kayapo Indians in Brazil, where Beb Cororoti has been known long time ago, that descended from the sky, who taught these people how to sustain themselves with, agriculture, and he built schools and so on and so forth. And still today, we have the ritual every year where the medicine man dresses up in this type of suit that depicts or replicates this being that visited them. An interesting, funny story, when Beb Cororoti showed up for the first time, he didn't speak. He was just, laughing with them. He was just, walking about. They tried to approach him at first because they were afraid, but then they realized that he was not a malevolent being, but rather good or nice. And so when they, were trusted him enough to approach him, the tradition goes they were able to dance with him, and he was laughing. And 3 days later, miraculously, he spoke their language. Has anybody been to a Berlitz language school? It takes you 3-4 days to learn the basics. Hello, how are you? My name is so-and-so. It's not going to happen the first day. So again, looking at this from a modern perspective, this is what might have happened. And this is what we call living mythology. I mean, this is not something, the very first time that this was recorded was in the 1800s. So again, people say, oh, no, this is all modern stuff. Somebody went there with a Time Life magazine showing Neil Armstrong on the moon. So they were able to recreate this straw suit and big hoax and, fool everybody. No, the very first documentation of this dates back to a long time ago with pictures, with hand-drawn pictures of ethnologists that recorded. Yes, please. In Brazil, in the Amazon jungle. Yes. And I can tell you all about it later, exact locations and all of this. Okay, so here we are in Palenque, Mexico, Yucatan Peninsula. You will have to go inside the Temple of the Inscriptions. You will have to go down deep inside, into the ground, subterranean. You will find a triangular door that's now barred off. And you will find this world-famous Palenque Lid, stone slab. And this slab is in the ground. You first have to climb up the pyramid and then you got to go down inside the pyramid into the ground, subterranean, so that you can reach the slab. Now everybody always asks, how old is this? And the answer is we don't know for sure, because in Maya religion, Maya mythology, all the buildings that you see today are not the original ones, because every 52 years they built another layer on top of the more ancient former building. So you have all these, 3-4 layers that were just built on top of the other pyramid. It was a worship type thing, because Quetzalcoatl, or Kukulkan, the flying serpent, was allegedly appearing every 52 years. And interestingly enough, the reason why 50 conquistadores were able to conquer millions of people was because they just happened to show up in the 52nd year. So the Incas and the Mayas thought, oh my God, that's the return of the gods. So they didn't attack them. But that's a whole different other story. But anyway, so here we have this ruler, Pakal, sitting in this position very reminiscent of Apollo astronauts as they were shot off to the moon in the rocket. He's sitting here manipulating some sort of control. He has something in front of his face, some visor. His foot is almost as if on a pedal. Back here you have something that looks like a flame. Again, this is a representation by an artist that saw something or was told a story and he said, how can I create this or depict this in stone the best way? Archaeology says that no spaceship, no nothing. This is merely God Pakal on his way as he is dying to the underworld, as he is swallowed up by the underground monster. You have a tooth here, you have a tooth here, thus this here is the jaw, he's eaten alive. So while he's being devoured alive, a cross of life flourishes out of his stomach, signifying life while he's dying. This here, these two parts are the cut off, is the cut off tail of a rattler, a rattlesnake. And back here, what we think is a stylized version of flames, of an exhaust. Those are the stylized beards of a rat. Okay, tree of life, again, all these interpretations of something that I, again, call misunderstood technology. Linda Sheely, one of the most eminent scholars in Mayan language, literally months before she died, reneged her entire life's research. And in her last book, she actually wrote down what she really thinks all of these hieroglyphs say. And all of you can go to Barnes & Noble or Borders tomorrow and get that book by her, and I'll have the title for you back there. But she says, this is Pakal on his way to the Milky Way, to the universe, traveling. Well, you have some live shots. And by the way, the slab is fairly large. I had an audience member last night, and maybe somebody knows this here, but I forgot to ask the gentleman. Apparently here in LA, there is a replica of this slab at some sort of a museum. Does anybody know where that is? Yeah, I'll try to find out and let everybody know later. But you have to see it's a massive piece, very intricate, and again, the artist trying to depict something he did not understand, something he didn't have the technological knowledge for. Oh, yes. There are remnants of Pakal, human bones. No question that the ruler, Pakal, is depicted. However, the fact that he was able, in all of the mythologies that are surrounding it, the gods were constantly there at all times. Oh, another thing about the age, I forgot to tell you. As I have established before, that chamber is underground. When the archaeologists came there, the room was filled with stalactites and stalagmites. We all know a cave full of stalactites and stalagmites is very, very old. And you can determine by the size of the stalactites and the stalagmites, you can determine the age. What did the archaeologists do? Because out of their enthusiasm to get to the loot or to get to the treasure or to the slab, they took crowbars and just smashed all the stalactites and the stalagmites without taking even a day to measure and do some measurements to determine the age of this thing. Because I propose that this thing was way older than the pyramid above. But that knowledge is lost forever because of this greed to get there not tomorrow but today. Stalactites, stalagmites, dating be damned. So unfortunately, in this case, we'll never know. And unfortunately, they will not allow us to, chip the thing and do the thermoluminescent analysis on this slab. But anyway, so, some critics can always say, well, Giorgio, you're looking at this at the wrong angle, because when you get to the crypt there, you're not looking at sideways, but you're looking at it from here because you're standing like this, so it's basically standing upright. And I'm like, okay, fine. What I see immediately is this bell shape right here. You have the tip, you have that bell. Let's go on the other side of the planet. Here we are in Borobudur, Indonesia. These are so-called stupas, and in Buddhist religion, in Buddhism, a stupa is a vehicle with which to reach the realm of the gods. Who or what is sitting inside a stupa? A Buddha. With angled hands, arms. And so you got the bell shaped with the tip. The similarity. And I think what might have happened is this. So, and here I would like to conclude my lecture. Thank you very much. It's been a tremendous honor to be here.